Hello drawing students, this is a demo on sighting, and what you're going to need for this assignment is drawing paper. Your Strathmore 400 series will work great. If you don't have that, that's fine. Strathmore 300 will work as well. You're also going to need, of course, a sighting stick, and we went over that in the lecture. This is a thin, skinny dowel, and what works perfect is a barbecue skewer, but if you don't have that, that's okay. A pencil will work in a pinch. But preferably you can find something like this, and again we discussed the middle of a coat hanger will work as well, and just make sure it's straight. Alright, and then you're also going to need your Lumograph pencils, and you're going to use your B pencil and your 2B pencil. And the last thing you're going to need is an object. Choose your object wisely. I have chosen a pepper here, and I tend to think that something like this, like an organic shape like a vegetable. Organic doesn't necessarily mean the type of vegetable. Organic means as opposed to geometric. Organic is a shape that has kind of bulbous parts to it. It's just not geometric like something like this would be. Now you could do something like this or something else that is geometric in your house, but we want something relatively complex, but not necessarily as complex as that. I think a pepper is a good, or something like this is a good complex, but also simple enough for this one of your first assignments. So think about that when you're choosing your object. Okay, so a little bit of an overview of the process of sighting. We're going to hold our sighting stick in our non-dominant hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold it in my left hand. You're going to hold it at the end like this, very shallow with your fingers. If you're taking an angle measurement, or for your axis line, if you're taking a relative proportion measurement, you're going to move your hand up and down using your thumb and the tip of the sighting stick. And then every time you go to take a measurement, you're going to extend your arm fully and lock your elbow, and that's going to make sure you have a constant measurement every time, because if you can imagine, if you take a measurement here and a measurement here, that's two totally different measurements. So to make sure that you're constant, you want to always lock your elbow. And also every time you want to squint one eye, you see that I do it involuntarily now. I close my right eye and I keep my left eye open. And I remember that because I'm always using my left hand because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to always use my left eye. Because that just lines up, so that keeps that practice at the top of my mind, that I'm always going to keep my left eye open and do this. So you can borrow that if you want. You can take that method and use that if you want. So we're going to start by determining the top and the bottom of this object and how big we want it to be on this page. We want this object to fill this page. We're not going to make a small little drawing right here because you bought an 18 by 24 drawing pad, so you're going to use it. So we're going to fill this whole page with this pepper or whatever object that you chose. It's going to fill the whole page, okay? So remember, we decide first on where the top and where the bottom is going to be. Now notice where I have put this is at the angle of the axis line, or what I determine the axis line to be without sighting it yet. But I've determined, okay, top, bottom, this pepper is going to exist in this area. It's going to take up this whole drawing paper. The next thing we're going to do is the axis line, remember? And we can actually now sight this. So the gestures we did super fast, but now we're slowing way down, and instead of kind of guessing what that gesture was very quickly, or guessing what the axis line was very quickly in that gesture, remember we did the top and the bottom, and then we did the axis line super quick. Well, now you can slow down and you can sight it exactly. So remember how I said how we're going to hold this, doing an angle measurement. I'm holding it at the very bottom so that I have this whole stick to make that angle with, so I have a really long line to trace for my angle. So I'm going to hold it like this, and I'm going to hold this very shallow so that when I go to bring it to my drawing paper, I can lay this as flat as possible on the page. And remember, I am extending and locking my elbow And look, I made that axis line even more dramatic axis line than it really is. So this is my axis line, and I can go ahead and just trace that in the air. Oh, sorry, that's moving around a lot. So that is my axis line. So I was a little off here, but that's fine. It's just my little markings to tell me where to stop. But that is my axis line. So again, for an angle, you want to extend your arm. For every sighting, you want to extend your arm, but you're going to hold this at the very bottom because you saw how much of that I had left to trace when I brought that over. Now this next part is where people get really tripped up, okay? The angles and such make sense to people. Okay, I sight that angle, I can bring it over and trace it. But the relative proportion part is where a lot of students really get confused. You seem to think that if you take a measurement here, it's just same measurement here. Well, your drawing ends up being this big. It ends up being this size, and you don't really understand why. You're like, why doesn't this? Because it's a relative proportion. So you make that measurement in space, and then you copy that measurement and enlarge it on your drawing paper. So let me show you. What you're going to do first for your relative proportion is cite the height compared to the width, okay? I am holding it like this, where I'm going to line up the tip of my sighting stick with the topmost part of the pepper that I see, and my thumb with the bottommost of the pepper that I see. So I'm going to hold this over and do that really quick. And that is the topmost part. And a little trick is to line that vertical measurement with the axis line. Okay, and then I'm going to flip it horizontally and measure that against the width. So what I measured was that the width was about a little bit smaller than the height. And now I'm going to compare the width to the height the other way to see where does that width end up. Okay, so what I measured was, again, the height was a little bit longer than the width. So it's about, the width is about this much shorter than the height. So if I said, okay, this is the height of my pepper, that width ended about here. So if I take, that's about the whole length of my sighting stick. So I'm going to flip that 90 degrees and give myself a little mark. And that's about where the width of my pepper is. Right now it looks like a circle. Like it looks like it's going to take up a circle, but it's not. You'll see that in a second. And I'm making these lines really dark so that you can see them, but you don't need to make them that dark on the page. You only need to make them as dark enough for you to see them. And so we'll keep measuring. And what I did measure was that where the kind of top bulbous part right before the stem, that was the same, to the bottom of the pepper, that was the same measurement as the width. So I can do the same thing and go from this bottom. See, no, that doesn't work. It's too short. So I think that this comes to about here. And I believe this is about where that bulbous part is. So this is a lot of adjusting. And so these first couple things are just marks. Okay, so now I kind of have an idea of the height and the width, a general idea. I'm going to just give myself a gesture of what this looks like based on those measurements I just gave myself. And I know this stem, I can actually get the axis line of the stem. Stem kind of goes like this, and then it juts out like that. And I think to constrain within that measurement, here is that gesture based on those measurements. So I'm fleshing it out a little bit more. I know it doesn't really look like anything just yet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this for a lot of tangent lines, for a lot of angles. That's that first use of the sighting stick, is angles. So I'm just going to go all the way around and use that straight line construction method. Okay, so next I'm going to try and determine the size of this stem. So I've kind of fleshed out a little bit of the exterior of the pepper. So I'm going to try and figure out the size of this stem. So I'm just going to measure it. It's at like this stem that kind of bends like this. And I've given it the axis lines. I cited those a little bit ago. But I need to know how big is this right here. And I can give myself a gesture right here. It's about this big. But I need to kind of measure really and see how big that is. So I'm going to remember I'm using the tip and my thumb. So I'm lining the top of the siding stick with the top of something and my thumb with the bottom of something. Right now I'm measuring the thickness of this part right here of the stem, the tip of the stem. And so this is what people normally do when you're first siding is like, okay, I have this measurement. I'm going to bring it over and trace it. Do you see how small this is compared to this big old thing? That doesn't work. It's a relative proportion. So you have to take a measurement and compare it to something else here before you can do anything here. So you have to measure two things to compare, and then you mimic that here on your enlarged drawing. So for instance, I just measured this in space. And now I'm going to bring it around and see what I can compare it to. I'm a little bit at a loss here. It's about this thickness right here. It kind of matches right here. So I'll just go down here and take that. You see how I just made that measurement here. I made a comparison, a relative proportion. I made a comparison in space. And then now I just came here and I took this measurement, the thickness between here and here, and I'm going to bring this up over here. And this is about the thickness of my stem. And I'm going to cite now angles down to kind of place this inside here. Okay, and now I need to fill in this green area right here where the stem meets the pepper and it's got that green area there. So what I'm going to do is I have this, so let me compare this to this width here and see what that's going to do. So get that measurement again of the width of the stem, bring it over, and it is about 2 of those. So what I just measured was this green area in here was 2 of these. So what I'm going to do is mimic that. I'm going to take this, okay, 2, or this is 1. So I'm going to bring it here, 1 and 2. See that? Again, relative proportions means that you take a measurement in space and you mimic that measurement on your drawing. Angles and axis lines are the only thing that you can do in space and bring it over and trace it. Okay, so I have a general idea of my pepper now. This is using those first 2 applications of citing. So now what I can do is check my citing with vertical and horizontal points of alignment. So with that, you hold the stick the same way that you do for angles and axis lines, and you hold it at the end, and you fully extend your arm again, locking your elbows, but you're going to hold this perfectly vertically or perfectly horizontally. And I'm just going to scan from left to right and see if there are points that match with each other. Are there any points of alignment that match? Okay, so what I did see was that this crevice right here matches perfectly vertically with this stem intersection here. And I am not 100% correct. So that means that this has to move over just a little bit for that to match. It's going to move over quite a bit for that to match. So I'm going to move this over more. Getting closer. See? It really does help. And I think this has to move over a little bit. So I think this comes closer like such. So that is what sighting does, is it really makes sure that you have correct proportions. Move that over a little bit. And again, I'm doing all of this checking before I do any fine-tuning of the drawing, before I really polish this off. All right, and now we will do horizontal points of alignment. Okay, so first thing I noticed was that this bulb is supposed to be lower than this one. So horizontally, that is the opposite. So I need to bring this down quite a bit to match that. Quite a bit as in a lot. All right, and then we're gonna keep moving up. These two crevices should, right? Hold on. Yeah, should match horizontally. So this has to come down quite a bit. You can probably tell, kind of looked kind of wonky. This has to come down to here. Something like that. So I've just measured that these two kind of crevices here were pretty well in line horizontally. So to kind of mimic that as best as I can, I moved that down. I don't think these were that off from one another. Okay. That's looking much better. Okay, now we're gonna scan, keep scanning up. Okay. So then I measured that this bulb right here was almost in line with this, the bottom of the stem. So that means that this has to come up quite a bit. And this lands horizontally with that. Okay, so that's pretty close. So now you can see how the 3 uses of sighting really help to get correct proportions. So that's how you're going to do this. You're going to start with identifying the top, or the bottom and the top, the top and the bottom. Sight your access line, and then start sighting relative proportions. Do a gesture in there, and then start sighting angles. And then once you kind of get an idea of the proportions, then check everything with those vertical and horizontal points of alignment. And that really helps, as you can see. I'm going to spend some time to kind of flesh this drawing out, because that's going to be your last step, is to really flesh the drawing out and make it look nice. We haven't gone over line or anything, and that's okay, but just kind of make a nice contour drawing of the object. And as I'm doing that, I'm thinking of both exterior and interior contours. Remember what we did during the blind and modified contour drawings? You're thinking about the contours of the inside and of the outside of the object to really describe the object. Again, no shading or value. You're just concerned with line and contours. Okay, so that's about as far as I'm going to take this drawing. Now, one thing I do want to suggest to you though is that for your in progress image that you don't get this far, otherwise you might have to restart. So I need to see your progress before you get to the finishing stage. I need to see the progress of your proportions before you start to really put in like any darker lines, because if I want to right now, I can't move any of these dark lines, and I did that on purpose because I was finishing it. But if I wanted, I can't really move that anymore. It's really there. So don't get that far before our in progress meeting, but definitely for the final, something polished like that, or even a little bit farther than that too, would be great. So just a recap, remember the process and uses of the sighting tool. If you need a refresher on that, go to the beginning of this video. Remember the 3 uses of sighting are angles and access lines, relative proportions, and vertical and horizontal landmarks. In that order is the most useful to you. Remember, we started by identifying how big we wanted this on the page. We identified the top and the bottom, and then we sighted our axis line and we traced that. And then we started sighting for relative proportion. We measured first the width of the object compared to the height of the object. So this is just in the case of the one object scenario. When we start to move to more objects, you'll start to compare objects to each other. And then we fleshed out the proportions a little bit, getting more angles, sighting the angles, bringing them over, tracing them, kind of moving things around. And then before we started to finish, we did that 3rd step of horizontal and vertical landmarks. And we just moved that sighting stick up horizontally and vertically across to check our measurements to make sure things were lining up where they were supposed to. And then once you have everything kind of moved around, you saw how much I needed to move stuff around. Then you start to finish the drawing up and just kind of try and give detail and contour to things. What you saw me doing around in here was I was just kind of lightly outlining value shapes, so highlights and shadows. You don't need to get that far, but I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of how to fill the inside of the object. If you have something that's kind of bare in the middle like this and not very detailed, then that would be a way of filling that in and giving information in there. Again, I don't want you to use a really complex object. That's just going to be too much for this assignment. Something that is relatively complex but simple enough. So probably not like just a sphere or a ball. But not something necessarily as complex as a shoe either. That might be too much for this assignment. Something that, again, just relatively complex but also simple. If you think this is too complex, that's fine too. Something as simple as a mug is great. So yeah, keep that in mind. And again, if you need a refresher on the sighting, go to the beginning of the video. And remember, no shading, no value. We just want to be concerned with the line for right now and for the next couple of weeks until we get to value. Okay? All right. Good luck.